Welcome. We're
Hello,
live.
we're live. Welcome.
We're alive.
Both of those things. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers.
And I'm Caitlin Miller.
We are both licensed therapists, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. So many. Almost innumerable.
Almost infinite.
This is just an open conversation. It's Caitlin and I are here chatting with each other and with you all. For those of you who are here watching this either live as we're doing it or in the future when it's on YouTube or whatever, we're trying to communicate with you. For those of you who are here and participate at the chat, put messages into the chat. That makes it easier for us to be a little more locked in on communicating with you what it is that you're interested in and thinking and exploring, whatever. We work with a practice called Effective Artistry that does individual, couples, and family therapy for people in the state of Illinois. Our office is based here in Northbrook, Illinois. We also work with a couple of executive functioning coaches who work with people all over the world, over the internet.
Over the interweb.
Yeah, the World Wide Web. Keep in mind that if you do chat, and we love it if you do, that whatever account you are logged into, if the name of that account will be connected to whatever comments you're making. This is public and online forever. That's definitely one of the big things that distinguishes this as not being therapy.
Oh, yeah.
Which I was trying to say last week, I'd rather err on the side of making people think it's a bigger deal than it is. I'd rather people be safer than sorry.
What do you mean by a bigger deal?
Meaning that when we say it's public and on the internet and whatever, it's not like we're talking about millions of people seeing this or whatever, although that is theoretically possible at some future point, or it's on the internet, right? I don't know. I don't want to scare people off from participating too much, but I also don't want to undersell it.
Well, I mean, honestly, if they have a mostly anonymous username, isn't there not a way to trace them, or is there?
No, that's what I would suggest for people is if it's something that you're concerned about, just make another account on Twitch or whatever. They're free accounts that.
Yeah, I don't think other people on Twitch can see the email address associated with an account, correct? It's just the username.
I don't know, but I doubt it, and it's easy enough to make a fake email address that you only use for this one thing or whatever too. Anyway, that's what I'm saying. I think I'm spending more time.
My name is Aphrodite.
I think I'm spending more time talking about it than is totally necessary. I think that's basically it. Glad to have you back after not having you the last
3 weeks.
Yeah, it's been 3 weeks. You weren't here the last couple weeks, so it's good to be with you again. Here we are.
Hi, Baston Cider. I think that's an emoji.
Yeah.
What does it say?
It looks
100?
like it says hi.
Oh, okay.
It says hi above it.
I can't tell if I'm missing an additional optometrist or if this is just my fate in life, is not being able to read.
Is it blurry?
Yeah, I can't see it at all. It literally looks like a brown thing on top of a white thing. I couldn't even distinguish it was letters.
Well, then, probably your prescription is. You said it's an optometrist that, if that's less than 20 feet away, if it's that blurry, prescription could probably do with some updating.
Yeah.
You do what you want. I'm not telling you to do nothing.
I just feel like every year it keeps getting worse and worse. And I'm not even that old.
I don't know what to tell you. Maybe it is. I don't know.
It is.
That doesn't seem to me to be reason not to have your prescription. If anything, that seems to be even more reason to get it updated as you go along. But
vision test, can you read this message?
Okay.
It's still pretty blurry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can read that.
But it's moving a little bit. And that's in front of a Kleenex box. So
that one I can't. NO6, MO6. We're just doing it. Oh, it says nice.
Oh, I definitely can't read that. That looks like
It's legit just a vision test now.
this is so lovely. I feel so cared for by Bastion Singer.
What do we want to talk about today? What's on your mind, or what's on your mind, Fast Insider, or anyone else? What do we want to discuss?
Selling ceramics, artistic identity, additional thing of effective artistry.
Throw a thing out there.
What about the effective artistry artist stuff you were talking about today?
What about it?
I'm just wondering everything as though I was in the
What
room.
a helpful question.
Oh yeah. What are the ideas and what do you imagine? Like the main. It seemed like you were talking about something specific.
I don't know, but I'm happy to talk about it. But I want to put context out there because we are talking to people who have no.
Yeah,
prior
I
knowledge of what
perceived
you're
that was my
referring to.
initial question.
That there are things that we want to be doing as a practice or as a group of, as a community or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're growing and so on, we're exploring like which different things to do at what point. And one of the things that we're starting to look at is offering creativity workshops or artist workshops through the executive functioning lens rather than, well, we're exploring both
That's
art
what
therapy
it is.
group, like therapeutic groups that
Mhm.
involve artistic components, but also groups that are not therapeutic in nature, that are aimed at like helping people to develop themselves in their creative work or as professional artists or
Mhm.
etc.
And would you say that the latter is the one that would likely be done with a coach versus the first one is with a therapist?
Well, obviously a therapeutic group would be run by, I always have groups run by two people. So the therapeutic group would be run by two therapists.
Uh-huh.
The workshops would be a different thing. It's not a group, it's a workshop. And there's different ways of structuring that.
Okay.
And so yeah, we find, but through the lens of, the language and the approach that I've been using for a while and that we all, especially the executive functioning coaches that I've been training people in. So approaching it through the lens of executive functioning in order to help people in their creative pursuits. And one of the specific things that we're talking about doing is having a booth at local like art festivals where you or Sarah, who's one of our executive functioning coaches, who is taking the lead on developing this stuff. People who are artists that are staff members here can work at those booths and have some of their own art out there, both as
that sounds fun.
Examples and conversation pieces, and maybe to sell, but more just as a way of like reaching out to the broader community.
Mm-hmm.
I have historically effective artistry has done no geographically based outreach whatsoever. Like we haven't.
Never?
No.
Wow.
Because our approach is always, some of this is a business model thing and whatever, but we've always been focused on the specialty. We're putting out there, a particular approach and a particular focus, and it's more important that, we're trying to reach out to people or make ourselves visible to people, accessible to people who are interested in those things, the approach or the content, the specialty, more so than people who just happen to live near the physical location of our office. But I do believe in...
How is art not a niche? An art fair?
Well, it is, but Northbrook Art Fest would still be geographically focused.
Oh, it felt to me like you were saying that instead of being a very specific thing, we're getting more general and being more geographically located. It felt like you were...
No, I was just saying we haven't done any geographic, like any outreach about like the specific geographic location, the physical community.
So we would still be presenting a niche?
We still are who we are, yeah.
Okay.
We do what we
useful.
do.
Okay.
I wasn't saying it in any comparative sense, just saying that we haven't done any outreach to like based around physical presence and like location, and now we're exploring doing some of that. So that's what we were talking about, I guess. Yeah, Sarah's been on the stream before. In fact, Sarah hosted along with Mike Wang, who's a friend of ours, who is a head of school at Fusion Academy, an alternative school. Sarah and Mike, the week that my youngest son was born, and I was in the hospital with my wife and the newborn baby, Sarah and Mike hosted the podcast. Mike's been on the podcast a bunch of times, and I think Sarah's been on it more than just that.
Were you calling it a podcast?
I'm sorry, the stream.
Oh, okay. I was
But
like, wait.
Mike and I did do it as we had a podcast where we like recorded as a live stream, but also took that audio and released it as a podcast.
We're going to try to re-release it, I think.
Cool. Yeah, I don't think we ended up actually releasing all of it. All the videos are part of the stream, but I don't think we released all the episodes as podcasts, so that would be good.
That would be really nice.
Yeah, I think it does. It sounds fun to me to sit in a booth in a nice park on a nice day and talk
Nice
to people
hat.
who are interested in talking to you. And does that answer your question?
Yeah, it felt to me that the meeting was also about like, does this mean we're changing directions as a business for the next step in expansion? I felt like it was also like we're choosing something and we're not choosing another thing versus we're choosing everything. That was just
I
a
don't know
sense
what
I got.
you're. Yeah, I don't.
Like opening a Chicago office versus doing art stuff.
There was no discussion of that other element or comparative element, but also I feel like some of this is like inside baseball that it's not necessarily of interest to people who are here for the stream.
Oh, okay, yeah,
So
that makes
just
sense.
You and I as members of the
Oh,
practice.
okay, yeah,
Um,
I understand.
trying to, like we say when we come on board at the beginning, we're always trying to do our best to be aware of what might be relevant or of interest to people who are here with us, not just the two of us.
Oh, well, something that might be applicable to that, and I'm curious your thoughts, Brandon, or anyone listening, that having either people who are clients as executive functioning clients or people who are clients, therapy clients, having some sort of either online or physical community of the people who do make art, having a place for it, but I just don't know. I don't know how that works in a therapy context, but I think that could be a really fun way to like platform people.
Agree, and it's something that we've explored and we can explore more and talk about the details, but still think that's not so much necessarily interest to people who are coming to the stream to talk about neurodiversity and whatever, talking about like our specific business ideas. And I mean, I'm happy if people want to talk about ideas about an online community or some kind of space. I'm happy to talk about that, but I guess in my mind I think of that as more of a talking about the direction of what it is that we're all doing, as opposed to
that makes sense.
people who are coming here because they're interested in exploring neurodiversity or talking about particular things. If you're interested in talking about it, I've been struggling lately with balancing, allowing space for people to be earnest and not pushing other people into being in that space if that's not where they are. Yeah, that's a tricky. Let me make sure I'm understanding what you're putting out there, which is wanting to make it so that people have the opportunity and feel safe to be able to be authentic and potentially vulnerable, without having to worry about how they're being perceived, but not wanting to communicate pressure to anyone that they have to be vulnerable or that they should. Like as a specific example, if I want to approach a concept in D&D very earnestly, but others just want to have a fun, casual Friday, they seem diametrically opposed. Oh, what do you mean by earnest? That might help me to understand better what you're, like by earnest, do you mean not humorous or intense or, in the particular case of D&D, like I can make my guesses and I can put some of those out there that might help you with finding language, not falling back on humor to avoid a topic. And in this case, are you DMing? Because if you're a player, it's a different thing. Or to broaden this beyond D&D, like if you are the person who is kind of creating the space, running, facilitating the things that are happening in that space versus being a participant. Those are different roles and would take us in different directions. Both. Well, so one element of this, if it's about being the DM, right? If you're talking about being the person who's creating the space and facilitating the things that are happening within the space, then a lot of this is about what's happening before you get into the space. It's about how you're talking about it to people who are potentially going to join the process and whatever, right? That you want to be identifying. If I'm aiming at having a game space that is like this, that is very earnest, whatever that means in particular to you, then I'm just wanting to communicate very clearly to people who are considering joining in that space what exactly we're talking about and allow them to self-select to whatever point coming in or not. When it comes time to like actually run the game, I'm a big believer in what in D&D is called session zero, but it's something that I utilize outside of the confines of just D&D, where the very first meeting is a meeting to discuss like set parameters and expectations and structure for the future meetings. Kind of in the same way that like when you take a class in college, the first session often, or the first class is often a discussion of the syllabus, right? I'm struggling as a player who wants to approach a topic earnestly and as a DM that wants to create space to do that, but also let people just enjoy the space and have fun. I like this because this is, as I've talked about before, like the more specific questions, the more specific responses and discussions that we can have. And so I'm focusing in specifically on the example you're using of D&D, but if that was meant to just be an example and you also want it applicable to other things, then just let me know as we go along. But in the realm of D&D, I still would encourage you to do some exploration of what exactly do you mean by earnest, and then what exactly would you do in terms of structuring the space in order to try and make that something that you and or others can explore. Because part of it sometimes comes down to more or less putting rules about what people can't do, right? That like, don't be making jokes in the middle of a dramatic scene or whatever, right? And that I'm imagining is part of what you're considering and part of why it feels so tricky, because you don't want to, there's a phrase that people use online of like, don't get your yuck in their yum, or don't yuck other people's yums, meaning like don't take something that people enjoy and then just tell them that they shouldn't enjoy it or what's wrong with enjoying it in that way. It really does depend on the group, and like session zero is a big part of that. But in real life, there are all kinds of contexts in which one person is attempting to do something earnestly and somebody else is making light of it or making jokes or whatever. And it's a choice, I suppose. I don't like choice there, but you can either roll with it and allow people to do what they're doing, or you can engage with that person and make it clear about what you're wanting to happen in that moment, which can lead to conflict. And this is not an uncommon conflict in a lot of social situations where somebody makes a joke that somebody else thinks is like detracting from what it is we're doing here and says, hey, can we take this seriously? And then gets the response of like, I'm just joking, lighten up, don't be so serious, whatever, and it can become a thing.
I'm really curious how much Baston has communicated to these people what they want. Because it was interesting to me how the first comment was like creating a space for others, and then as it's unfolding, it's more about like, I'm not getting what I want.
Yeah. So if you want to put some information in there about having communicated to people like as a player when you want to approach a topic earnestly.
And then I was getting a little distracted by your session zero because I think this is technically an assumption, but this seems like a longer term running group that already kind of has established people and a dynamic. The D&D group they're talking about.
As the one they're talking about being in as a player is something that's already going.
Yeah, and I
presumably.
just kind of assumed it was happening for a while, but that's so.
Well, it may have been, but either
Yeah.
way, if it's ongoing, it's ongoing. There should still be opportunity to be able to bring up things that you would like to be different, as there is in any
Mhm,
social situation, right? Like
mhm.
if you're working on a group project for a class or whatever, and things are going differently than you would want. Both games have been going for over a year.
Oh, it's 2 games? So one where they're the DM and one where they're a player?
I'm not
I
sure.
wasn't tracking
Do you
that.
mean one that you're DMing and one you're playing in, or are you talking about 2 and you're a player in each of them, but also thinking about the possibility of being a DM? One I'm DMing, one I'm a player in.
So I'm curious about, and please help me with this, Brandon, because I'm not used to like being the person who gives feedback on the comments, but giving the people a chance to say no by saying what you want, and then if they say no, then maybe Bastion wouldn't be stuck on this.
Um,
But I feel like that
you
sounds
just mean
more
like communicating what it is that you want.
Yeah, like diving into earnest. What does earnest mean? How does that approach all of this, and how does that feel different from having fun and being humorous, and then communicating what that would mean, and then the group would have a chance to say yes or no or play around with it, and then if it doesn't work out, it wouldn't be like something that Bastion's like holding.
Just so you know, the name is Bast and Cider.
Oh, okay. I can't even see it. Bast and
They've
Cider.
said in the past that that's the name of their 2 cats, Bast and Cider.
I was trying to think of a shorter, so I thought Bastion. Okay, so Bast. Bast and Cider.
Sorry, I was distracted by that part. But you're saying that just going the route of, or talking about going the route of exploring more what you mean and being able to then communicate to the others what it is that you're wanting to happen.
And then ideally that would reduce a tension inside of you of wanting something and not getting it, because you'd either clarify that you can't get what you want or you would get what you want. Because I don't think they said this, but to me it sounds like this has been like, I feel like I'm doing like a tarot reading and now I'm getting really
Getting really what?
I feel like, Brandon, when you respond to the stream comments, you respond to what's actually being said, and I feel like right now I'm responding to things that weren't said that I'm guessing about, and my guesses could be wrong, so now I'm getting lost in that.
That's fine. I really need to find a way to punctuate it better. It would make sense to capitalize the "and," but the editor in me blanches. I see what you mean.
No, I actually read it as BASTONCIDER, so that's why I was
Just missed
saying
the D.
Bastion.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Bast and. But thank you. Very, very kind. And also, I would not capitalize it.
In general, not just with the stream, but generally, I do try to respond to the specific things that are being stated. And of course, I, like anybody, am going to have like thoughts
Yeah.
about what might be behind things or, whatever. And when that matters, I try to ask to say, like, I'm wondering how long this has been going, for example. Better than what a lot of people misread it as. I don't even want to guess what a lot of people misread it as. And especially when it's on the stream and I don't have an expectation of somebody answering questions like that, then sometimes I'll go with like, if it's the case that it's like this, then here's some thoughts I would have. If it's the case that it's like this, here's some thoughts I would have. Or, here are some things that I think would apply in either case or whatever. But I do think it is, actually, I think it's relevant probably to this particular thing. Oh, I see. They replaced the N with an R.
Oh, yeah.
Which, to be fair, look very similar. I think some of that is just an online culture thing too, where you're just expecting people to have vulgarities in their names and things.
Yeah.
So.
And I feel like, Brandon, I'm at a place in my communication where I read so much into things that I'm not even conscious of how much I'm assuming. And so when I was responding, like after the fact, I realized how much I was assuming and then I got stuck. But I think when you're responding, you can track it much more easily. And so
Maybe. I don't know.
Then I was getting stuck in that loop.
There's nothing wrong with what you're doing, whether or not you tracked it after the fact. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing. And if you do track it, then as opposed to responding to that as though it means you did something poorly or need to shut yourself down, you would just say at that point, like, oh, I'm realizing that I made an assumption of this. Is that the case? Or whatever. This particular way of like going about doing things, focusing in on explicitly what people are sharing and whatever, is super useful. It is not fast. And that's part of the reason that like people don't generally communicate this way. We're all trying to get through communication as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible. And that involves a lot of interpretation and assumptions and whatever. So there's nothing wrong with any of that. It can cause problems, like knock-on effect problems, when you are making some assumption, even if it's correct. In fact, I think that's a lot of, call it neurodivergent people or former gifted kid people or whatever. A lot of us have had experiences where we're making assumptions, especially when we're young, about things that other people are saying that turn out to be correct, and people don't like that because they don't want it to be known. I also don't like going into a ton of detail, because once the deeper we get into a question, the more I just want to be talking face to face. Only so deep I want to go through text. Yeah,
which totally makes sense.
And with the context of being on stream, I'm always trying to like address the specifics, but also connect it to larger things that I think are likely to be relevant to more people.
Well, and I kind of think that there would be like two ways to do it, and the reading a lot into it is one way, and the taking it for face value and generalizing it and going slower is another way. And I feel like if I'm contributing in a way that's like diametrically opposed to the way you're doing it, that it like creates like a, I don't know, like I'm thinking about the New York Times advice column, which is like so much assumption, because it's just like a few paragraphs of things, and then the response is like so.
But the aim of the New York Times response column or advice column is not to actually give helpful advice to the people who have written in. The aim is to be entertaining to the people who are reading the advice column, if that makes sense.
Are you sure?
If the aim is to give advice to one particular person, doing it by posting their thing and then posting your response in a newspaper is not an optimal way to go about that. That makes sense?
But that's also limited information and text and in a public forum, and is relatively superficial.
Right. So the point I'm saying is that presumably the people writing the advice there are trying to write things that are entertaining and or useful to as many people as possible, rather than the specific person. So I guess I'm thinking about things like advice columns like that tend to be very judgmental, like quite often, or I don't know.
I didn't read the recent ones that way, but I think that is like a typical part of the format.
Yeah, I don't know about often or frequency or whatever, but it's not unheard of to have an advice column response where basically the entire response is like lambasting the person who wrote in the thing for approaching it all wrong or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not referring to them in that way, but that makes sense, and I do think it is part of it.
That's a more extreme thing, but like you were saying, like you have to make a lot of assumptions. You got a couple little paragraphs, you have to make a lot of assumptions. You can't ask for clarification. Of course, part of that is that you're selecting through all the submissions for things that you don't need to ask clarification in order to say something that's generally helpful. But this is also just a broader conversation about like mass media generally. Just throwing out a topic works for me. Yeah. See what conversation happens.
It's really interesting.
What?
I just, I think what happens on the stream is so different than anything I've ever experienced in so many different ways. Like,
sure. Yeah. It is. It's a strange, I guess in a way it's kind of like being on a panel in a sense, that like it is meant for
okay, that's helpful
people,
for me.
with some people actually being able to discuss with one another.
Yeah.
I've been hearing a lot about, I thought about this too, actually. I've been hearing a lot about the Reddit thread, Am I the A-hole lately? That sounds kind of like that. There's a subreddit, AITA, Am I the A-hole? Where people will like they put some situation out where they've done something that other people are accusing them of being in the wrong, but they feel as though their response, whatever they're doing, is an appropriate response to something someone else did. And they're literally saying, like, for all of you to weigh in on, am I being the a-hole or is the other person being
I
the
think
a-hole?
it's a really interesting premise if people take that seriously, because you're saying it from your point of view. There's such limited, I don't know.
It is interesting when people write things where, like, even people who are approaching it through the way of like trying to be impartial, I'm trying to give a neutral, is still, everything is filtered through our own perception and memory and biases. But it is definitely interesting sometimes when people will put things out there that they seem so confident in what they're putting out there that they're in the right, and everyone's like, no. Of course, then you wonder about how much people are.
Well, sometimes the opposite will happen too. Like with my clients, they'll say something that makes it sound like they're in the wrong, and then I'll ask a couple clarifying questions, and they're like, oh, whoa. So I think that's another thing too, or like missing tidbits of information that could completely change the picture, and then it just.
Well, that's why I eventually come down on it doesn't typically really matter. Like things I'll talk about, like fault has no place in any discussion of human interaction. To me, the am I the a-hole or whatever is, again, it's more about, it's like watching reality television. It's just entertaining to hear about other people's lives and woes, and the more extreme or ridiculous it is that somebody did, the more it's like, what? It's which is why a lot of the time things will get accused of or suspected of, like someone's making something up just for telling a story because that sounds too absurd or whatever. Yeah, I generally don't think that's a good way to go about things. It's fine to get a sense of what other people think, what other people's perspectives are, but in this case, I'm referring to some other people as in like third parties that are not involved. Obviously, in direct interactions, yeah, it's very useful, important, whatever, to be aware or to try and get some awareness of the other person's perspective and what they're thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
But going to the crowd and saying, are you with them or are you with me, is not generally a super helpful thing to do unless you're just feeling bad and looking for some validation and a bunch of people who are going to say like, yeah, you're in the right, which can be fine.
Someone I know did that once, and it actually completely backfired. They posted something on like a chronic pain group on Facebook, and it was very clearly like they were in distress and real pain, and they had the diagnosis, and they have doctors that backing it up, they have treatment plan, blah blah blah. And then all the people in the chronic pain group said like, you're making this up, like, and it was, I thought it was wild. Like the comment was so perfect for the group and so easy to just assume everyone would be like, oh, I've been there too. And then it was just like, no, you're just complaining. So I feel like that's a risk that happens sometimes when people put themselves in these positions.
And even if you get all the validation and whatever that you're looking for, it reinforces that approach of there is a way to determine like that this response is appropriate and this response is inappropriate, which is generally not a helpful lens to look at things through.
Yeah.
Like even if everyone sides with you and you feel better, that has a cost to it of now you've got to wonder the next time something happens, like, well, is this a time that I'm in the wrong? As though that, like, it relies on the premise that we can identify one person is at fault or one person is in the wrong. And for practical purposes, yeah, we can do that. Like, I'm not saying there's a way to like roll through your life and never have any thought about like, no, my approach is the right one and theirs is the wrong one, or like they're the jerk and I didn't do anything wrong. Like that's necessary, inevitable in the reality of everyday life. But when we're taking it back from that and talking about it and looking for some kind of cultural consensus, it drops too many details and specifics, and it just becomes something that reinforces this like, am I a good person or am I a bad person? Which is, I'm glad that people are concerned about that. I am concerned about that. How am I affecting other people? That's a good thing. But it's important to know that like these are just not answerable questions. You just do what you do, and you listen to other people to the best that you can, and sometimes when you listen to them, they're going to say stuff you disagree with, and you are allowed to disagree with, I don't know. This idea that there is a definable set of like, that person's at fault. There's an old joke of like, well, really it's George Washington's fault for founding this country. Like that's one of the problems with the idea of fault is in human interaction. It serves a purpose in other things, mechanical engineering and whatever. But in human interaction, oh, it's your fault because you did this. Well, it's somebody else's fault because they did that, which caused you to do this. Well, it's your mom's fault because if you'd never been born, then it wouldn't have happened. Have you ever listened to Judge John Hodgman? I've always been really impressed by the way they balance entertainment and taking the premise very earnestly. Is that John Hodgman? I might be but the comedian, like the guy that used to be on The Daily Show?
I don't know who that person is. It sounds cool.
Back with the earnest thing.
Yes, it is the person.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think John Hodgman's really funny. I haven't listened to that, no. But I mean, that's a lot of like, oh man, timing wise, I don't know. Enculturation, mimetic learning, like the development of what we would call a culture and the ongoing living development of a culture, but then also the embedding of that culture into each person who is a member of that culture. Process of enculturation. The larger scale the culture gets, the more you're relying on like this mass media stuff. Especially, you can find a lot of discussion about the declining role of organized religion, especially in Western societies like American culture. But yeah, the point of a community is that there are some shared principles or values or expectations, like it's not just putting a bunch of random people together. That's not a community. There is something that is shared and communicated. There are standards that people are held to and etc., which is fine. But when your community gets big enough, and America is 330 million people, like you can't really do that very effectively as you get bigger and bigger. They take a supposedly small dispute between two people and mostly make jokes about it, but by the end of the episode, he makes a ruling of who's right and who's wrong, and it's usually very thoughtful. It sounds fun. I'll do things like that sometimes, honestly, where I'll like play a role in like helping someone explore something, and then later on give like, look, honestly, here's what I think.
It's kind of what you always do.
Oh, I don't often do that second part where I give my own thoughts, especially in like therapeutic contexts and whatever.
Oh, in therapeutic, yeah, okay.
But also because my thoughts generally come down to like, I don't know this other person. Like everything I know is something you've shared with me. So anything I'm going to say about what I think and what I feel is obviously a reflection of what you think and what you feel, because you're the one presenting it to me.
Yeah, I think I want to say that more often in sessions.
And I will sometimes then say, like I'll say things like, yeah, I like this person for you and I hope this relationship works out. But I don't know this person. The only reason that I would like them and hope it works out is because you're presenting them to me as someone that is likable and that it would be great if the relationship worked out. So it's just, I'll give my thoughts as a reflection to that other person. It's nice that you can sit with a problem like, my neighbor keeps leaving their dog's poop bag on my trash can. How do I tell them to stop, and have a real good answer by the end of it? That is funny. And that's a thing about like the practical and whatever, although that would be an example. I don't know. Are those people there live? Like to be able to, I'm imagining it's more like the advice column where someone like writes a situation and then they discuss it. It involves a lot of assumptions and whatever. Which all of this to me does connect to the initial question about being earnest, which is just you want what you want and other people want what they want. And it's a process of communicating. In the specific case of D&D or any like role-playing game where there's the balance of the in character, out of character, right? There's me, the player, and there's the character that I'm portraying, and the same dynamics that show up in the group of people around, like that one person wants to get serious and into role playing something very earnestly, and somebody else just wants to crack jokes, especially when they feel tense. I can see how that would be frustrating for the person who wants to be serious. And that's also valid for the characters too. So there are characters that, and part of what I love about D&D is that it is a social game. Like, it is about the fact that we talk about found family and all this other stuff, but effectively the group of characters that the players are piloting in the campaign are a found family, right? Like, they are people who, by the nature of the design and structure of the game, are tied together and will stay together through thick and thin. Because if one of them leaves, like, we can't play that game anymore. We need a new character now. This particular one was a couple arguing about how to address the issue. They always have the two litigants on to talk to each side. Oh, I like that.
Oh, wow.
They have the people there. One of the things that I'll point out to people generally is fairness, like many constructs, is very useful in helping people to explore what they think and what they feel and what what their ideal options would be moving forward. But there's nothing you can describe in any way as being like, this is so obviously fair or this is so obviously unfair that can't be reframed in some other way to make it seem the opposite way.
And I think for me as a neurodivergent human, I will hear things like that the first half and think that fairness does exist, and then act as though it does for years.
Well, fairness exists in the minds of the
Sorry,
people who
as though
consider
there
it.
is a definitive way to determine if something is fair 100% or not.
That everyone would agree with?
Essentially, I wish that 10 years ago people would say, this is a framework to talk about this thing. It doesn't mean that it is correct or right or the only way to do things, but this is a way to frame our conversation, which is like, what is fair? How do you conceptualize fairness in this situation? What do you want? What do you feel like you would have gone differently? What are the dynamics? Instead of like, well, you are determining what is fair, and we will figure it out. And then you will stick with that forever. And it just... Oh.
Well, it goes into a broader thing about this is
Take
why
them so literally.
This is why I tend to approach this with people as those things are useful but ultimately don't matter. Like,
I love the word useful so much.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be something that you're like somebody did something wrong in teaching you this framework. It's a useful thing.
I try to dedicate my time with clients and other humans as this is one way to think about this and it could be useful, instead of this is the way we do things, as though it's the only.
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying is,
yeah.
In order for something to be a rule or applicable in more than one specific circumstance, it has to be described in a way that leaves a lot of specifics out. Otherwise, I mean, if it had every specific detail of a circumstance, it would only apply to that specific circumstance. And so the more generic you get, the more it's just like, one of the things I'll say is, it's in the absence of evidence to the contrary, right? Like, given no evidence, given no specific knowledge that some other given way would be better, I can default to this. Is it always going to work that way? No, but when I don't have other information, it's going to work that way more often than others, is the belief that I'm rolling with, so. But fairness in particular, oh man. Fairness, there are a lot of these concepts that are a lot more useful on a large scale and very unhelpful generally in individual circumstances.
Yeah.
And fairness is one of those things to me. When we're designing like large scale things, systems, things that are going to impact non-specific people in the future or in other locations, then it is very important that we consider what is fair, equitable, et cetera, et cetera. But when it's like, I'm a person and you're a person, we're sitting right here, like, what's fair doesn't necessarily matter because I have my thoughts and you have yours. And in that case, going to what's fair tends to fall under that category we talk about a lot of justifying. Instead of being able to just say, this is what I want, or this is what I think.
Oh yeah.
It turns into this is fair. It's like an appeal to the authority fallacy, where the authority is the non-specific masses, like everyone. If I say, this is so obviously unfair, then what I'm communicating is everyone would agree with me that what you're doing is wrong and what I'm not doing anything wrong. And that's generally not super helpful. My mom says whenever her aunt was talking about men with someone, she'd always say, "But is he useful?" Insert British accent. But is he useful? I don't know how to do it in
But
British
is
accent.
it useful? But? I don't know.
Yeah, like we talked about, utility over accuracy, right? Like you can get lost in trying to figure things out in the realm of cognition and go down paths that really have no application to the practical matter at hand and are not actionable and actually make things worse.
What?
At the beginning, the initial statement was about a balance between creating a space where people can be earnest versus feeling like you're pressuring them to be earnest.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to use the term tension as opposed to balance a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
They mean, in the details, when you get down into it, they more or less mean the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like balance is trying to get two opposing forces to equal one another out. Now, whenever I say useful, I have to say it in that very particular way. But I like to say tension only because when people think of balance, there's this connotation of like walking a balance beam or a tightrope or whatever, where the idea is, or the way it's thought of, is that you can find this balance and not be pulled to one side or the other. Where I like to emphasize that it's tension. You are being pulled to one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Even in those instances when you're walking the tightrope, what you're doing is, as you feel the forces come out of balance and start to pull you in one direction, you adjust to bring it back to the other side. So the same, I'll use that metaphor of like, it's when you're driving down the highway and like the point is not that you situate the steering wheel exactly where it needs to be so that you can let it go and it will continue to move straight down the road. It's constant micro adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I'm saying in this particular case as an example of session zero or not, previous discussions after the fact or not. There is no way to set it up that it will always just be smooth sailing.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to pull it in one direction. If you want to pull it in the other direction, you do. I find that to be a particular benefit of playing D&D, is to allow those dynamics to play out.
Mm-hmm.
One of the pieces of advice for people who run D&D games is to structure it so that each character, each player has their time to shine, right? That if one person has built a character that is focused around combat and they're really great at it, not so great at other stuff, then you want to build in to the structure of what you're doing that there's an opportunity for there to be a combat for that person to shine and save the day. If somebody's building a very sneaky person, if somebody's building a charismatic face type person, you want to provide opportunities for each person to shine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, to me, and I'm sure I'm not the only person to talk about it this way, you want to do that for the player more so than for the character. Like, even if I build a person that's really designed for combat, if I as a player am somebody who my joy out of playing comes from the humor, then we want to provide space and opportunity for the humor.
Mm-hmm.
And something I would say, I don't know if I've heard that particular brand of metaphor before. Ooh, I like getting ones out there that might not have been put out there before. If what you're talking about with playing earnestly is like dealing with things in a more realistic or complex way instead of surface level or glib or whatever, then conflict with the people around you when they're not taking it seriously is part of that, right? Like, one of the things that you can explore earnestly is an earnest discussion with the people around you who are interfering with what it is you're trying to do. And in the case of D&D or role-playing games, there's an element of managing in character versus out of character.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage, to the extent that it's possible, to do it in character.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not always possible. But yeah, if that's what you're looking for, that D&D is hard. D&D is hard. D&D is hard. Except, I mean, yes, and also no. I love tabletop role-playing games, not D&D specifically, but just the format. For the same reason I love the theater or improv or whatever. It gives a structure to group social interactions
Mhm.
that allows you to play around with certain things.
Mhm.
And it's hard to quote unquote get it right. It's hard to have a session where everybody loves it the whole time and everybody's having a great time and there's no conflict.
Mhm.
But to me, the point of it is not to eliminate any conflict or prevent anyone from ever feeling bored. It's to deal with the things that come up as they come up,
Mhm.
and doing it in the framework of a game that allows you to do things differently.
And I feel like no matter how perfect session 0 feels in like intentions and what people want, I feel like inevitably there's always conflict.
Sure. And yeah, that's the thing. You can't set it up perfectly. It will come up. And it's about learning how to navigate that. And this is something that I myself, like, I notice about myself that when I'm hanging out with my brothers and my friends and playing games and whatever, I tend to slip more back into what I would think of as like older patterns of communication where I'm teasing people and giving them crap more than I typically do these days. Where like some of the skill that everyone is utilizing / building is how to like give an earnest critique or whatever without making it too earnest. Like when I'm frustrated by how long one person is taking on their turns or whatever, how can I get that across to them without it now becoming something that people's feelings are hurt and the whole thing is derailed? And especially I think this is especially true of people who are socialized as men, but certainly not exclusive. The teasing and whatever comes in there a lot, where instead of an earnest like, hey, you're taking a long time with your turn and it's frustrating because I'm going to need to be going in 30 minutes and it feels like you care more about trying to make an optimal decision than whether we're all able to complete this thing before I have to go. To just be like, doom, 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 like giving someone crap.
Yeah.
I love D&D because it gives my introverted friends to come to my house and play with me in person. Of course, everything else too, but that's a big perk. One thing I'll throw out here is I haven't heard people use this phrase as much over the past several years, but it used to be thrown around online a lot, was Matt Mercer syndrome, because Matt Mercer is the dungeon master of Critical Role, which is like the big, I want to say first, but I don't know first, but definitely like the first big live play, like watch a bunch of people play D&D. And it gives so many people an impression of what playing D&D is like that is so different from my experience of playing D&D before that. It's much more like narrative focused. All of them are actors, professional voice actors. And this is now their like full-time job. I know. Matt Mercer is amazing. Definitely a parasocial relationship there on my end. He's also got similar long hair and similar stuff in our backstories. In my mind, Matt Mercer is my friend. He doesn't know me, but parasocial relationship. He is amazing, and the whole group is amazing. But they are all professional voice actors with a crap ton of training in both like acting and improv and whatever. They're also a group of friends that has known each other for over a decade and played with each other and learned how to play off of each other and whatever. And even with all that, there was still one of them that got booted from the show early on because was being disruptive to what everybody was trying to do. There's a lot that goes into that. I mean, but anyway, D&D, partly I think because of that, partly because of the shift to 5th edition, emphasizing different things, blah, 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 has shifted more recently to be the narrative, the idea of it as like a structured long form improv kind of thing is much more emphasized than it used to be, at least in my experience. And a lot of people are coming to it with that thought of, oh, we're basically like acting out this cool long story, which I love. And even my own gameplay shifted a lot after learning about, like watching Critical Role and others like it. I mean, I got a voice modulating like software so that I could emphasize my own voice acting and blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
It's great, but it's also not what everybody is looking for. And you want to structure around all that. So there can be some discussion of that, of like, look, we have different, when there's when it's combat, yeah, that's where the people who are in it for the crunch and like min-maxing and whatever get emphasized. And then when we're having an emotionally intense like role-playing scene, that's where those people take a step back a bit. And
Mhm.
in the same way that if I'm someone who's not so into the combat part, like if we're having a combat and I'm sitting there saying like boring, let's move along or whatever, or actively sabotaging what's happening in order to resolve it more quickly or whatever, that we would discuss that and say, hey, you know, find that this isn't your thing and you can take a step back just as a particular thing. I think the no phones at the table thing, which many groups have as a rule, is a terrible rule. Let people, when they're bored with what's happening, let them do something else so that there's not this like pressure
Interesting.
that everybody every moment has to be engaging for every person. Yeah, I'm not as big on the combat stuff, so when that stuff's happening, I tend to zone out a little bit more, just wait until it's my turn again. I'm more into the role-playing stuff. I participate more when it's that kind of thing. I just want to have like 4 long discussions at a coffee shop with Taliesin. You would love Taliesin. Taliesin Jaffe is one of the people on Critical Role. Anyway, same thing with the earnest thing or the role-playing thing is in the same way that if I'm not too into the combat, I'm not going to ruin it for everyone else or complain or whatever. Same thing too of like, well, if you're not so into the like, we're in town for a week making preparations part of it, okay, well then you can kind of take a step back during that part and the DM tries to balance it against each other. But frankly, I think the conflict between someone who is being humorous, even in ways that you would think of as being like inappropriate or detracting from the experience, like as long as it's done through the characters, I think that's a great opportunity for the role play, you know, like obviously we got to get wrapping up and I won't share other thoughts, but I'll say that in designing my own role-playing game, TTRPG system, there are certain changes that I focus on making because of there are instances in which you want people to have the experience of playing a character that is not them. There are also instances in which you want people to be able to engage just as themselves. So as an example of that is like a riddle or a puzzle that is introduced into the game that the group has to solve. If I'm in a point where like we're solving a riddle or trying to decode something or whatever, like I want to be able to do that to the best of my ability to do it. Instead of saying like, well, my character isn't as into this stuff as I am, or, you know, my character's got a lower intelligence. I hate the stat of intelligence. I don't think it should be a stat.
There's a stat of intelligence?
We can talk about all this stuff. I will never in a system of mine have a stat representing intelligence.
No.
But that's one of the problems is like, well, your character wouldn't be able to come up with that idea because their intelligence isn't high. So yes, there's a balance of sometimes I want to play it as the character. Sometimes I want to just have everyone able to be engaged as themselves through their characters. And I think that's part of, I think they're changing it to like education or something. Yeah, that doesn't solve the problem. That's
almost worse.
I
have a PhD.
I have my thoughts. I'm not saying anyone's doing anything wrong by doing it that way. I just have my own thoughts about whatever. That's why there's so many systems and you find one that's good for you. Until it becomes a problem, I just assume my players are adults that can decide for themselves if their phones are a distraction to them. Yeah. I mean, this is a thing we're all getting together to do for fun. It'd be like having a get together with like 8 people at your house, like hanging out and chatting. And if someone checks their phone, be like, that's not allowed. Like, it's just a weird thing to put on a social interaction. Let people, or like if someone were to go to the bathroom, be like, no, you can't go right now. Like, we don't need some of these rules. Anyway, I think role-playing games generally should be approached through that of you're creating a character that is different from you in some ways, but is exactly the same as you in all ways which are not specified. In other words, my character is Brandon, except all the stuff that I'm specifically identifying. You know, they are an elf who lives in this world and does this thing.
Are you sure, Brandon?
Blah, 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 and whatever. I don't generally play elves, but I also have, man, we should just do a whole stream on TTRPG design. Because
I would love to hear more.
The idea of whether you call it species, lineage, race, heritage, whatever, like is a unnecessary concept.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I have lots of thoughts. Some other time.
Yeah, I
Cool.
agree. Bast and
I do
Cyber.
believe Brandon is an elf. For what it's
That's
worth,
the point I was trying to make.
in
Are
the-
you sure you're not an elf right now?
in the D&D frame, like through the
Little
D&D, well, that's a class. D&D has what
Oh,
have
okay.
previously been called races, but are now shifting to be called lineages, and classes. One is about like who you are, and one is about what you do. Anyway,
Okay.
in case anybody cares, I identify primarily with half orcs and then half elves. I am a mixed race person. I'm a very big person with a very deep voice, so I have had a tendency to identify with half orc, whatever phrase it was called at the time. Anyway, some other time. I gotta get going. This is fun. Discuss it with people, either in session 0, before game, after session, whatever, or as it's coming along, in character or out of character. And that will, that process will be more effective for you the more you become clear on what exactly you are meaning by earnest, and what exactly you mean by creating a space for it. Is it about excluding other things that detract from that space? Is it about doing things or including things that create it? And your awareness of all that and the language and the ideas you have about what you're looking for and how to communicate about it will get better as you communicate about it. So thinking about it helps you to communicate. Communicating helps you to think about it. I play a lot of Elven Monks because I feel very old, and I
So
like being
cute.
able to say I'm actually 300 years old, and I'm also very good at punching things. Cool.
I love that.
For the longest time, I was very big on people who basically wear heavy armor and also are very focused on like protecting and helping people, like your basic knight in
I
shining
wonder
armor
why.
type character. As I've gotten older, I've started shifting more into like creating characters where it's not about a particular play style, but more about the character I want to play. But in real life, I'm definitely a bard. 100% a
I don't
bard.
know what that means, but I'm interested in hearing.
Some other time.
Yeah.
I gotta get going. This has
Thanks,
been fun.
everybody.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. It's good to be with you. See
You
y'all
the stream.
next week.
Bye.